Today I'm going to show you how to make a restaurant-style paper holder for your workshop, kitchen, kids' art room, or restaurant, I guess. And we're going to make these using magnets, bearings, black walnut, and rope. Before the build, I want to go ahead and start with a brief design history of this thing. I think so often we see on YouTube and blogs the final thing that was made, but not the napkin with a sketch of the bad idea that started this whole thing in the first place. And by the way, I love bad ideas. Well, it all started because my wife and I both wanted one of those restaurant-style ticket holders. You know, you just throw the ticket up there with one hand and it sticks. I wanted one for schematics and pin-out diagrams, and she wanted one for Christmas cards and wedding invitations. But the nice ones were pretty expensive, and the cheap ones, they had their own problems. So I set out to design my own restaurant style, in my style, note card and other sort of paper holders. Idea number one was a springy finger-like mechanism teeter-tottering on a rod, but the finger-like things weren't finger-like enough for this to be a finger-like mechanism. That led to number two, which is a much more finger-like mechanism, and it was so finger-like it was kind of creepy, and I didn't feel like my fingers would like making them. Then for idea three, I moved on to magnets and bearing balls. The bearing balls roll with a paper which reduces friction. I used this for a couple of years, then moved on to number four to address the falling steel ball issue. Number four was a ball bearing with a rod through the center of the ball bearing. The rod keeps the bearing in the magnetic pull range of the magnet, yet allows the magnet to move a bit to accommodate the thickness of a stack of papers. But the neodymium? The neo-whatever magnets were too strong for the mass of the ball bearing. And that led to number five. I took one of those and embedded it deep into the back of the wood. It looked like the bearing of the ball bearing of the bearing ball was floating. That looked really cool, looked really magical. But I got so wrapped up in that I forgot the rope. For idea number six, I just put rope through the ball bearings, and frankly it looked poorly executed. Without seeing the magnets, it seemed like the rope was holding the bearings to the wood, which would be a bad design. The middle bearings wouldn't hold the paper very well. I mean, it wasn't that way, but that's what it would have looked like. So I ditched the embedded magnet idea and bought several sizes of weaker ceramic disc magnets and found just the right one. So that brings us to idea number seven, the one I'm going to show you now. The parts list is pretty small, just magnets, bearings, wood, and rope. For the magnets, get 18mm by 4mm ceramic discs. For the bearings, get 608 2RS bearings. The RS stands for rubber seal, which keeps the grease inside the bearing. Wood, well, that's up to you. And then rope, hemp, 8mm to match the inner diameter of the bearing. The tools list is pretty short too. Aside from the basics, you need an 18mm Forstner bit, black hot melt glue, and a drill press would be nice. Not necessary, but it'd be nice. And I'll have links in the description for everything you see on this page except for the wood. We put ours near our kitchen where my wife already wanted something like this in this calendary chalkboard area. Keep in mind that since you only need one hand to operate this thing, you can mount it higher since you can reach higher with one hand than two. It's a certified party trick. For the wood, we sliced up this sweet piece of walnut that worked really well for this area. I routed a groove up top to hold chalk and then sanded using my recipro sander. The important part here is that at the end of this step, the wood needs to be dimensionally as it will be at the end of this project. Find your stud centers and write them down. Set up a combination square and calibrate it to the exact center of this board. Since all the holes for this project need to go in the center of the board, this will be a handy tool to have around. Then on the board, center punch your stud center locations, and go ahead and drill them. I used 2-inch Craig screws, so I started with a 3/8 Forstner bit, deep enough for the screw head to be able to go below the surface, then finished the hole with a 3/16 drill bit. Magnet spacing. We went with a 4-inch spacing for these magnets and bearings, which sometimes means a little bit of overlap based on the things we put up in these areas, which really isn't that big of a deal. For the rope holes, the board clamps the rope to the wall to maintain tension. So plan your spacing, pencil it in, and once you're happy with it, punch the centers. For reference, we started the magnets 3 inches from the right, and then every 4 inches after that. The rope holes are 2.5 to 3 inches from the end magnets. Step 3, finish the holes, route a couple grooves. Take an 18mm Forstner bit, put it in the drill press. Hopefully you have one. If not, get one. If you don't get one, just use a drill. Let's not go down that trail again. I'm going to assume a drill press and strongly recommend a drill press. And if you don't have a drill press and you're still following along, then find some way to get the depth fairly consistent. But on the drill press, it's pretty easy. Just pull your wood up there, drop it down, set the depth stop, drill the holes at the right depth each time because you have a drill press. A 3/8 drill bit works really well for 8mm rope. While we're dealing with the rope, flip it over, make a really small channel for the rope to go down. Not deep, because you still want the board to be able to clamp the rope to the wall. I used a round nose bit for the router. You could also use a carbide bit for the Dremel. These are actually super handy. I'll put a link below. If you don't have a Dremel, you can always just go to town with some sandpaper. Now before you actually apply the finish, be sure to sand your wood to its final grit. And I typically use a random orbit sander to go through the grits, 80, 120, 150, then 180, then hand sand at 180 with the grain. And by the way, with the grain does not mean along the length of the board. I see a lot of people do that. No, it's with the grain. It's following the variation of color and texture on the side of the wood. You shouldn't be sanding lengthwise unless that's the direction of the grain. Okay, the finish. So I used a 50-50 mix of polyurethane and mineral spirits. But if you're a beginner not really into wood finishing and you want a few pointers, Google this. Wipe on poly baby butt. The first result is a Sawmill Creek forum post. Whoever wrote this did a really good job at articulating the process of how to apply this 50-50 finish. Final tip, don't be afraid to do a much simpler, easier finish. If I was putting this in a laundry room, I would just use spray shellac or spray poly, something like that. In fact, the last couple coats on this one were spray poly, so I'm totally not above doing that, and I would recommend the same for you. Installing the magnets first had problems. Install them after the finish, which means you'll have finish in the holes. Clear out the holes by just drilling through the finish and not the wood. Then you can glue the magnets in and have that nice bonding surface. Hot melt tips. Use the small gun that takes the narrow sticks, has a precision nozzle, and is high temp. Pair that with black high temp glue sticks, and you'll have a great bond with a gun that doesn't have all the ooze out problems. Has really good control. $12. Feed the rope through the board and the bearings, so the loose ends of the rope are hanging down from behind the board. Put a knot on one side and some sort of decorative loop on the other. Step 6. Mount it on the wall loosely, then tension the rope, then mount it the rest of the way. If you have a friend, that would make things easier for you. If you don't have a friend, I'd recommend you stop watching YouTube videos and go be a nice person to somebody. I had to do this myself. Oh, and quick tip. If you scoot the bearings towards the middle, then tension it, then slide the bearings back towards the sides, it'll become more tense. Anyhow, just don't go too far with tensioning this thing, otherwise it'll be past tense. Gotchas. The two side bearings will be stronger because the rope is pulling them towards the magnet. So if you're using thinner paper, you might want to prop the rope up and away from the board using a spacer or an eyelet or something like that, so the rope isn't pulling the bearing into the magnet. Magnet size. I did tons of testing here and I definitely like the 18x4 millimeter magnets the best. The best range of paper thicknesses they handle, but if all you're using this for is thin paper, go down to an 18x3 or a 15x3. I tested both of those and both make it a little bit easier to slide thin paper in. Also, be sure to use thick enough wood that can properly clamp the rope to the wall without just bending out of the way. The simplicity of a ball and a magnet means we can just stick it anywhere that's magnetic. If it's not, we can glue it anywhere. The ad hoc nature of this thing is so good. The only issue with number 3 was that the ball could fall, and it's probably not a big deal for most of us who can just pick up the ball if it falls and put it back. And by the way, I've been using this ball and magnet version for a couple years now. It's been awesome. I've been waiting to show it until the polished version was done. So now it's time to set up 2 dedicated note card areas, above the island and workbench areas. Above the island's currently in prototype mode with the upside down piano stand, but the other wall is ready, it's been ready.